Ta-da.
Okay. All
All
right. All
right.
right. Welcome. Secret word is laws. Thank you for joining us for our 4.5 GBM. Don't forget to sign in. We chucked the link into the chat. So quickly about Showcase. Our we don't have quite enough games to have like a competition showcase, but we do want to showcase everyone's like progress. And if you have completed a game, we totally be down to see it. And yeah, keep up the good work. In addition to that, we revamped the Discord last time. Hope you have explored a little bit, but just to bring to your attention some like fun things. Of course, the new landing channels. We've got a sick FAQ now, so it might answer some of your questions if you have any. And we've got suggestions in the admin category now. There's an anonymous form there, so if you don't want to call us out, you could be anonymous about calling us out. But you could also chat in there, and we totally won't mind. But yeah, some quick reminders. The secret word is laws. Don't forget to submit images for the photo gallery, I guess, competition. You can submit as many as you'd like. We'll look through it and we'll post it on the official Discord. And if you have any more questions about that, Michael posted the announcement, so just peek that. And yeah, I guess that's it for the businessy related stuff. On to Michael.
Standard business. Standard business. Right.
Standard business.
So today the idea is to cover session 3 of 3 of 3D modeling. So far we've done um oh, did Evan just leave? Evan totally just bounced. That's fine. That's fine. We've been doing 3D modeling stuff so far. And we've covered standard like making stuff in Blender from scratch, just basic extrusion and all that. Then there was another meeting where we covered more about fixing the glitches in the models and doing a few more like advanced things with them. And now finally, it's time to focus on model metadata. And so that's like all the data that comes with a model when you export it. So without further ado, let me crack open my stream and my PowerPoint, and we'll do a little demonstration and run through that as well. Give me 2 seconds here. But yeah, so today we'll be covering exporting those 3D models for your games, whatever you're doing, whether it's in Unity or Unreal Engine. This is some pretty standard stuff that should be useful to everybody. Here we go, cracking it open. Sorry about that. um, yup. Right here, learning 3D modeling. So, without further ado, modeling with metadata. So, today's topics, we're going to talk about like workflow, like how you go from nothing to a model to exporting it into Unreal Engine and then what happens there. What material IDs are. These are a really important concept to be familiar with. UVs as well, easily the 2 most important things we'll talk about today. And then vertex colors, baked normals, and exporting. Vertex colors and baked normals are for doing some really impressive magic with 3D models. We'll talk about the use cases there. So what's the workflow? The usual sequence of things you do to go from start to finish. We make the object in Blender. We learned how to do that in like the first of these meetings. If you weren't here for that, go watch it. There's like the videos are saved in the GBM summary channel. They're on YouTube. Number 2, we make sure that a model is glitch free. That was in our second meeting. That's fixing things like n-gons, when you have like a polygon that has more than 3 or 4 sides and the computer has issues triangulating it and gives you bad results. It's when you have like multiple surfaces overlapping and they create this like glitchy effect where you can kind of see one through the other. And then additionally, normals. Sometimes your model has the outside faces, as the computer interprets them, might actually be pointing inside, and that creates a bunch of issues. So once we have all of that fixed, and we have learned how to do that so far in the last 2 meetings, and you can go watch those whenever you want. The next thing is to assign material IDs, UV unwrap and export. And that tends to be a tedious process, but it's necessary and there's ways to do it well. So you might remember this slide if you came to the first meeting. This is like the first slide of the first PowerPoint in the first meeting, and it was mentioning the different types of metadata. And there's vertex colors. That's what's going on over here. I'm showing that there's an RGB value for every vertex of this cube. There's UV maps, which is what we're seeing over here. It's this cube unwrapped in a cross shape onto a UV grid, and you can see the effect there. Like D6 gets mapped to the top, D5 to the side, etc., etc. And then material IDs, and we'll talk about that. So let's start with material IDs in Blender. Material IDs show up in this little side panel over here. What you do with the material in Blender matters very, very little to anything you do with it in Unreal Engine. You don't do the materials in Blender. All you do is you make the slots. So all that this is, even though we have a color associated with gold and it's probably like shiny and all that Unreal Engine is going to see when we send it this 3D model is it's going to see 3 empty slots called wood, metal, and gold. And wood is going to be associated with certain faces on an object. Metal is going to be associated with certain faces, etc. So yeah, what are material IDs? They're integers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that represent a material that's associated with a face on our object. They're like named slots in Unreal Engine. So here's like a little Thor's hammer kind of thing. You might see this in Clash of Clans. To add a material slot, you click this new button in Blender. You can double click a slot to rename it, and then in edit mode, you select the faces that this material slot will represent. And when you have those faces selected, you'll do assign. So I'm gonna run through that process right now. Let's take a look. Let's say we have this this default cube right here. If I go down to the materials, that's this little red icon here. I have a default material. I can just hit this little plus button. This creates a new slot. Let's fill it with a material, and we'll name this material 2. And just to be able to tell them apart, we'll make this one red. And then when I'm in edit mode and I can select faces, I can say this face is going to be material 2. And now we don't see anything change because by default Blender doesn't show us that. But once we go to viewport shading, you can see what effect I just had. I can say this face is going to be material 2. I can say I can make another material, and I can be like, okay, green. This face is going to be material 3. There we go. So back to the PowerPoint. That's the process of designating material slots in Blender. These are important because when you want to texture an object, textures actually we'll be explaining that in a second. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So important notes about materials in Blender. Messing with all the settings is only relevant to what you see in Blender, like I said. So like they won't change what the final product looks like. These only have an effect on what Blender looks like. All that matters is that you created that slot. And they help you tell apart materials. That's all it does, is it helps you like see which one is which inside of Blender. That's what that color matters for. You cannot see colors unless you're in one of these 2 view modes. That was that button on the top right corner that I clicked in Blender. And the base color property of materials, that's this little bar over here, is base color, is what allows me to change the color so I can get a better idea of what's what in Blender. But that's the only purpose, is seeing what is what. So back we are. We now know how to assign material IDs. I'll explain why that needs to happen in a minute, but for now, it's important that you know that you can assign these material IDs to different surfaces. So UV unwrapping, it's the final step before exporting something from Blender, and it is critical. UV unwrapping is a pretty annoying process, I'd say, especially if it's a complicated model, and it involves cutting up your 3D object into flat bits and then throwing them onto a 2D grid where we can assign a 2D position to them that our material and its textures will project onto. That's a little difficult to visualize and understand. So let's look at a few examples. Here is a 3D model of I don't know, something that might be in a real-time strategy game. There's a military tent and a little generator, these like little walls. And this is the UV unwrap of this model. And I know it's kind of blurry and low resolution. You can see the cross here is over here. We're looking at the ceilings over here, but this is actually like one of these rectangles here that I'm kind of circling is actually the wrap all the way around one of those tents. So you kind of get an idea. Like this is like the facade of the side of one of these things. Over here, you can see the dome is a big chunk of the UV grid, and then this is probably one of the walls. This is another wall, etc. Here is another example of a UV unwrap. This is a player model. Pretty disturbing. Some of these geometries when you see them on the UV grid, they can look pretty weird. Hands look pretty messy, but you can see what's going on here. There's more or less cuts being made along the surface, and then those cuts are being used to take this and unwrap it. And so here's the unwrap of my hammer. You can see this right here is one of the faces. This over here is another face. This is probably running along the top, and this is running along the bottom. I know that this is the bottom because there's the hole in it. That hole is a hole around where the handle meets the bottom of it. So I don't want to UV unwrap. Yeah. This is what happens when you don't UV unwrap in games. When you see stretched textures, that is a UV unwrapping issue. Bad UV unwrapping in games. Really, really bad UVs. So we always have to UV unwrap. I know it's tedious. I'll explain how the process works in a minute, but this is what UV unwrapping helps prevent. So how do we UV unwrap? UV editing workspace. Yeah, the general process is select chunks of faces that should have connected textures, press U to unwrap them, and then hide the faces in your 3D view. So it's like a quick 4-step process that you have to repeat for big chunks of your model. So let's take a look. How do we unwrap this? Let me go to UV editing, and here we are in UV editing. So on the right, you can see we got our cube. On the left, we've got the unwrap of the cube. So by default, this cube comes unwrapped as a cross. Let's take a more complex model. How about it? Let's do Chris Vector dot blend. Here we go. This guy. So really complicated model here. It's going to be very not fun to unwrap, but we're going to get through it anyways. I'm just going to explain the process here. So here's the 3D model. There's all these red lines on it that you can see. Those are really important to UV unwrapping, and I'll explain what they do. But for now, I'm going to get rid of them. And so let's go to face select mode. So how would we do UV unwrapping of something like this? Like I said, you select chunks of the model that have connected textures, and you hit U and you unwrap. So I'm going to select all of this, and this. And actually, I'm gonna I'm gonna hit U and I'm gonna do unwrap. And over here in our UV grid, we may not see it. We're looking at, here we go. Let me fix that real quick. Oh, new, okay. Unwrap. It's possible we're looking at the wrong UVs. Also, this was made on an old version of Blender. I apologize for that. I'm gonna crack open a different model that's a little bit more recent. Let's do a Starbucks cup. That's excellent. Yeah, here's a Starbucks cup. Okay. Flipped sides, but that's all right. So on the left, Starbucks cup. On the right is its UVs. I'm just gonna do that. Untriangulate. There we go. So we want to unwrap parts of this. How are we gonna do that? Let's unwrap the bottom first. I select the entire bottom. I make sure that I don't have anything else selected. I do seem to have that edge selected. There we go. And I hit U, unwrap, hide it. Great. We're done with that chunk. We don't have to think about it anymore. I can select all of this side here. That's probably going to be where the main texture is going to go. And I don't see any reason for it to be disconnected from these bits texture-wise. Like there's no, it's not going to be anything there that's interrupting the pattern. And so I'm going to select all of this and do U unwrap. Now it does this. Why does it do this glitchy mess? Because it doesn't, it's a cylinder. It's weird. It doesn't know how it's going to cut this up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to edge select mode, and I'm going to select all of the edges. We're pretty much just going to cut. We're going to make a cut in the side of our thing before we tear it. So I select all those edges, and I'm going to do Control E, mark seam. That's what you do. And then I'm going to select those edges again, and you'll see what effect this is about to have. It's pretty, it's quite the effect. Oh boy. You unwrap. There we go. So you can see that cut was made along, it's made, sorry, control print screen. There we go. We made that cut along the edge there, and so it's produced this result here. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes some intuitive sense. Because what we've effectively done is we've like, yeah, we've made a cut here, and we've also made a cut at the edge of where we were unwrapping. If I wanted to, I could put a cut there. It wouldn't really make a difference. But yeah, so now we have that's been unwrapped. It looks like we actually didn't catch this top portion. So if I do U and unwrap it, notice that it unwraps it separately. So I have to select all of the like contiguous bits of mesh that we want to. Oh, that was a misclick. Simultaneously unwrap, and there we go. So it's all connected now on our UV grid. I can just hide it, stop worrying about it. And now this is all that's left of our mesh. And so you kind of have to repeat this process. I'm going to keep running through it because this is a really, really important process to be familiar with. So I'm just going to select all of those faces, get rid of these guys on the side because we don't care for them. And I'm just going to unwrap that. And there it goes, hide it. I'm going to select all of this ring, and you know what? I'm gonna actually unwrap the entire top of the cap as one thing, but first I'm gonna insert some seams so that we can avoid this hole, which will no doubt uh, produce some glitchy effects if we don't get rid of it. So mark seam around the circle there, or the like tic tac shaped hole, and then I can just do that, and I think this should all be part of the cap here. Um, Now we're going to run into a similar issue here that we ran into last time because it doesn't quite know where to make a cut. So instead, it just tries to unwrap everything like that. Because it's a cylinder. So for cylinders, you're kind of obligated to make a cut somewhere. I'm going to take the liberty of making the cut towards the back of this thing, right around. Well, optimally somewhere symmetrical, so I'm thinking there. And just going to mark that as a seam. And I'm going to select everything that's left, honestly. I don't see any reason not to. I'm going to deselect that part in there, and I'm going to do unwrap. There we go. You can see that's our entire cap. It's not quite uniform. You can see it sort of stretches out there. And that's a problem. There's ways to fix that, but it's not a huge problem, not for our purposes, unless we were trying to put a texture on it. And you can see where the lip of the hole that you would like drink out of has been isolated because of that seam. And then I can select the interior here. And if I unwrap this, it's going to be pretty weird. Yeah, whatever. I can just there we go, unwrap, and that works. That works. So that's our whole model. And now if I unhide everything, here's all the unwraps on top of each other. We're not done yet. So let's talk about what else needs to happen. Um, Marking cuts is Control E, mark seam. That's how you do those cuts. You can select isolated chunks with L and then use the context menu to group by seams, so you can select UV islands right off your model. Right, what do I mean by that? When I marked those seams, there's ways for me to use those seams to make selecting chunks of my model a little bit easier. That involves doing something like this, where I can do mark seam, and then I can do Ooh. Well, see, okay, all of this has been marked as, every single edge there was marked as a seam. Let me clear that, and I'm just gonna do mark seam, and then I'm gonna do, um, I'm just gonna go around and manually deselect. No, there's got to be a faster way to do this. Clear seam. We'll just do this for now. Clear seam, and so now, oh, that didn't quite do it. Clear seam. There we go. That did it. So if I select this, I just was able to select that entire surface very quickly. How did I do that? I pressed L. Normally, L selects continuous parts of your mesh. Normally, so this entire thing is connected. If there was like a face floating off over here, maybe it's technically part of our mesh. L would let me select it entirely. It just selects like connected chunks. However, this little context menu down here for select linked has an option for me to select linked by seam. So it'll try to propagate the selection outwards until it hits a wall, and that wall is defined by the seams. So when I try to deselect in here, it runs the deselection all the way up to that red wall. If I try to deselect that, it runs it up to the boundary of the seams. So convenient. Notice there we deselected only that chunk because it's bounded above by that red seam that we made. So, yep. Seams don't get passed on when exporting. Only UV data does. Yeah, you don't have to worry about where you mark your seams. It's more that this data, it's the UVs that matter. It's what's on that 2D grid at the end of the day that matters. So let's talk a little bit more about that. This is a video of me UV unwrapping this hammer. I'm sure we could. I think this is worth watching. I'll make this full screen and we'll see if it's a 6-minute video. So I'm gonna try to narrate over it as we go through this real quick. I select all of that side, I unwrap, and then I hide. I select those bits, and I recognize that the fact that they're looping creates that very nasty effect. So I point out that we should unwrap and now I mark seams, I believe. I'm probably, yeah. So I'm marking seam across the bottom there. Oh, around it. Okay, to make like a nice loop where we can mark seams. But I'm probably pointing out that that's not the best place to cut it up. uh, let's see. Let's see where I go with this. I hide the side. Now when I unwrap that, oh yeah, see, it makes it really nice and linear. Okay, yeah. So see when I unwrap it, perfectly linear because it's getting cut up. Now this time it's behaving a little differently because of the fact that the handle is in there. So I put some seams around the edge of the handle, and they serve their purpose well. However, I don't want to unwrap it yet. I'm still just unwrapping parts of the hammer. So I unwrap that, hide it. As a general principle, you want to keep things as connected as possible when you're doing unwrapping. So, um, you want to avoid too many seams. Like, there's no reason to just cut up your model into the smallest little parts because those seams they show up when you texture it. You can barely see them, but they're not pretty. It's like there's just spots where like maybe the texture repeats, and you can see that the repeat doesn't quite match up. Um, you've probably seen it in like a video game before, and you just haven't reacted to it or really recognized what it was. It was just like, ooh, texture glitch. Um, So here we go, making more seams and then unwrapping the handle. This time we're doing it like a cylinder. It's going to go around because I make that one seam there. And there it goes. I think I'm happy with that result. I'm probably not happy with the, yeah, that doesn't look right. And the reason that doesn't look right is because that little box at the end is just kind of weird. Yeah, there we go. That looks better. It's not optimal, but it looks better. Um, I'm sure I'm considering. Yeah, and then I explain that what happens if you try to unwrap it. Yeah, so that's not good because that would be very that would introduce stretching to the textures because it's taking this big, oh, and I settle for that apparently. So never mind, guess we're not operating under the highest standards here, but that's okay. um and then, okay, and then here's what I do. This is important. So this is what we were about to get to towards the end of this video. I go over here to the left, I unhide everything. We have this huge mess of overlapping geometry. I go to UV and I do average island scale. What that does is it makes them have the same size relative to each other as they do relative to each other in 3D space. So it's like taking the Mercator projection of like the planet and then like separating out the countries and then averaging their size. And I'm sure you've seen some maps that do that are like, oh, look at the actual size of Russia versus the actual size of Greenland and Alaska, and it shows them all shrunk down together, um, or like expanded in the case of some equatorial nations, and that's that effect. So, and then I do pack islands. That's right. Packing the islands is what that does is it tries to do some algorithm that squeezes them together into the most efficient space possible. As you can tell, that algorithm is really bad. Like it is filling up like a tenth of space here. It's doing an awful job. That's partly because we have really long islands, but it also doesn't know to rotate them. So there's no idea that it should be rotating them at 90-degree angles or 45-degree angles. Um, so yeah, uh, that's the process of UV unwrapping. So once again, once we're here, we have all of our geometry successfully UV unwrapped. No, let me delete this cube I made off to the side. We have all our geometry. I go to UV. I do average island scale, and now they're all scale size. So you can see the top of our cap relative to the sides of our cap, of our cup, the top of our cup, the cap, the top of the cup relative to the sides of the cup. And now they're all the same size as they would be in 3D. And now I do pack islands, and it does its best to try to fit them together in the most efficient manner possible while preserving their size. The way that it's doing this, and the reason why its algorithm sucks so much, the way that it's doing this is it's just generating rectangles around them. So it's just going, I'm gonna fit this, and I'm going to fit it next to I'm gonna fit it next to this, and then I'm gonna fit this in there. Oh my god, I'm gonna fit this, and then it's going, I'm gonna fit this. That's all that the packing algorithm is doing, is it's generating boxes, and all it knows is I'm going to rotate these boxes like 90 degrees. That's the most that it's willing to go. However, you can go and download add-ons for Blender. Oh, meeting chat. The top of the cap of the cup. Yes. You can go to some websites and find yourself some add-ons for Blender like UV Pack Master. Some of these are free, some aren't. But notice what that just did. It made this a significantly more efficient pack by squeezing this circle to be inside of the bounding box of this C shape that's like the lid. It really fits everything way better. And this is rotating them 90 degrees. If I set the rotation step size to 5 degrees in pack, it goes for a slightly more efficient solution. So this is optimal because what we're doing here is we're saving texture space. We're allowing more of our texture's resolution to be used on our 3D model. What do I mean? Let me show you exactly what I mean. Let's make a color grid. There we go. And then let's set the material of this to have the color of our color grid. And then let's look at that. Um, there we go. So there's our cup with the textures that we've applied. And so you can see what a seam looks like in the context of textures. That's where the texture repeats and it doesn't quite line up. That's okay because we don't expect any pattern to go there that we're going to generate with a texture. At the most, we're going to use the Starbucks logo or some logo. It doesn't have to be Starbucks. No, we're not sponsored by them. Um, but that logo, we're probably going to opt to put it on the front of the cup. That's why I put that seam in the back. It's out of, well, it's not quite symmetrically in the back, but it's out of the player's like it's out of the focus of the model. You generally try to hide your seams, but these aren't going to be that visible when the entire texture is white. But what did I mean by efficiency? Let's see what happens when these are smaller. Yeah, look at those low resolution textures. Nasty. That's what happens when you have a less efficient packing algorithm. Because that packing algorithm can't make as much use of the UV space. So, it's not bad, but it's not quite crisp. Whereas when I apply a better algorithm and pack it better, we get a tiny bit more resolution per surface area of our cup, We get a tiny bit more dy dx per dA of the surface of the cup. So yeah, packing algorithms, etc., etc. Alternatively, if you don't want to do this manually, you don't want to select a chunk of it, make those seams, hide the bit, and then repeat the process 100 times for your really complicated model, you can do Smart UV Project. What does Smart UV Project do? It looks at our model. It looks right at our model. It looks it in the eyes, and uh, it says, hold on, I might be able to illustrate this better with material capture. That doesn't quite do it. That doesn't quite do it. No, I was thinking there might be a curvature material capture. It looks at our model, and actually, yeah, this would work. Ridges. Let's make those ridges really, really visible. Ridge. So notice these white lines that I kind of just created on the model. Um, if we flatten this, yeah, there we go. These are points of high curvature. There's particularly high curvature around the lip of the cup. So what Smart UV Project would do is I do U Smart UV Project, and I set the angle limit, and it determines what angles it's going to chop this up at. So if it sees any angle higher than I'm gonna set to 45 degrees, it's going to insert a cut there. And there it goes. And that's what Smart UV Project gave us. Notice it makes excellent use of our UV space, but there's going to be a lot of seams. So let's take a look at what that looks like. It's going to be a lot of seams here. Yeah, not bad. Higher resolution, right? Because it's using more of that 2D space to project onto the 3D space. But seams. There's lots of seams everywhere. Not necessarily bad in our case, but now there really isn't any room to like fit a uniform logo onto the front of this cup without crossing over at least a seam or two somewhere here. I could repeat this. I could say Smart UV Project with angles of 66 degrees and above. And now there's fewer seams. Of course, it makes a less efficient use of our UV space, but definitely more tolerable. And it doesn't, it has no difficulty making a perfect cutoff for that top circle because it's just surrounded by that sharp angle. It's exactly where a human would make a cut, but the algorithm's not perfect. It doesn't handle cylinders super well. It just tries to make cuts periodically, but it doesn't do a great job of it. And if I pack this with a packing algorithm, yeah, we managed to squeeze even more space out of it. So yeah, that's Smart UV Project. Principles of UV unwrapping, right? So hide the seams, minimize the stretching. Those are your goals when you're UV unwrapping. Hide the seams, minimize the stretching, and then ultimately use as much of that 2D space as possible. How do you minimize stretching? It's not really it's nothing more than like a bit of an intuitive process, I guess. There is a way to visualize stretching here. I don't quite remember how we do that. But I think we do there's minimize stretch, which is a little algorithm that'll automatically attempt to minimize our stretch. It seems to have crashed Blender, however. Oh, no, hold on. It's a scroll wheel thing. That's right. So as I scroll up here, I can try to minimize stretching. But you can see it's already like pretty minimized. So going backwards doesn't really fix anything. You can see the effect if you focus on D2 on the left side there. You focus on that D2 on the cup. You can see where minimizing the stretching kind of actually makes the D2 look a bit better. But it also breaks the surrounding the uniform texture surrounding it. Yeah, stretching is it can be an issue. I don't quite remember how we visualize stretching, but I know that there's a way to go about doing that. You can also edit the seams and then re-smart UV project if you find issues. Yes, yeah, you totally can. You can be like, okay, I like this, but I want to, smart UV project again. You can do that. You can totally go over here, modify these guys and do other things with them. You can move them around, and then you can maybe say like, oh, okay, I like this one and I like this island, so I'm going to keep these. And then I'm going to reproject everything else by selecting everything but those, and then projecting those, or trying to unwrap. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to do this. Generally, I think it's best to do it manually. There's few exceptions to that, unless you have something really organic that's going to be really hard to unwrap. So most of this stuff, UVs, normals, material IDs, it all boils down to materials. What are materials? This is going to get a little bit into Unreal Engine stuff, but not really. Um, a material is a set of instructions that's applied to a 3D model to drive the appearance of the surface. That is, the textures are part of a material. So textures fit into materials, fit into the material slots that we designate on our surface, and their position is described by the UVs that we define for that given surface. Multiple materials can be applied to one object. The material IDs are like slots that we define in Blender that our materials will then fill, whether you're in Unity or in Unreal Engine or any like program. You fill those slots is what you're more or less doing. One material can be applied to multiple objects. That's an optimization kind of thing, and we'll talk about that. Yeah, here's some demonstrations of some gorgeous materials. Uh, yeah, some complex scenes with a lot of materials. You can see here, this guy's got a bunch of really complicated like red textures and stuff on this thing in the background, this foliage. Um, we've got materials here that are probably being reused a lot, like this this brick material here that we're seeing is getting used over here. It's the same exact thing is probably being reused over here, over here. All of these walls are reusing one material. This copper material on this pipe probably being reused on this pipe, probably being reused on these metal hooks, on those smaller pipes, these pipes up here, these smaller drain pipes. Um, just a bit about material reuse again, but yeah. The jungle one is among my desktop backgrounds, actually. Yes. Spot on. um, multiple materials per object versus one material per object. Looking at Master Chief here, Master Chief totally has multiple materials. He totally has probably one material for all of the green parts of his armor. He has another material for all the rubbery metal sockets in between. The glass on his helmet is probably one material. The question is, why would you separate things into multiple materials versus one material? Well, multiple materials, um, it- materials are convenient, particularly when you have a repeating pattern that you want to apply in great detail. So this green pattern over here that we're seeing, um it's repeating. It's got like this like grain pattern on it. It's the same, it's reflective. It probably has a couple of small ambient scratches all over the place. It's a nice material. This black one is probably just like a green variation of this green one, but it's repeating everywhere. What isn't repeating is the scratches along the edges. These scratches aren't repeating. um these bolts on the side aren't repeating. And stuff like that can actually be accomplished by sort of stacking materials onto each other in Unreal Engine. There's all sorts of, or Unity. There's all sorts of complex techniques there. But at its core, if you aren't going to have little details that are topical to the model, and instead you just want like the same repeating texture in great detail over the entire model, um, that's when you use a material specifically for the regions where it's like this relatively uniform texture that's repeating. Um, yeah, like this uh, yellow kind of orange glass visor thing. Um, Definitely just a repeating hexagon pattern that's been assigned to that surface. And if you wanted to, you would be able to reassign it to any surface on Master Chief, and it would work perfectly. And that's when you make a material like that. The reason you avoid materials that are like not meant to be reused, I guess, is because when it's a really uniform pattern, um, you can you can tile it beyond just one by one. you can tile it to 2 by 2. What do I mean by that? This is so confusing. I'm sorry, you guys. You can do this essentially. If you have a really uniform pattern, you can do what I just did, which is to say that that pattern is going to repeat like 100 times across your UVs. And as a result, you get incredibly high resolution. I can zoom all the way in here and get really accurate like texture detail even when I'm zoomed in like crazy, even though I'm only using a 1024 by 1024 texture. Why? Because I've set it so that it's repeating hundreds of times across our UVs, and the game engine will handle that perfectly. It'll let you zoom in, and you'll still be able to see crisp, fresh texture. You can't do that if there's details on this texture that correspond with parts of the mesh. Like say you had say yeah, right, like this. Say you wanted to have like I don't know, uh if this was the only material that we were applying and you wanted the cap to be white, you wouldn't be able to just texture the cap white. You would have to texture the rest of the cap with it. You see why that's a problem. But if this is just a material that's going to repeat over the entire surface, maybe it's just like a cardboard texture, it's really generic. You want to be able to assign it to spots. You can, if it's really uniform, then you break it into its own material. And as a result, you get the ability to zoom in at great depth. Um, yeah, that was a bit confusing. So yeah, a bit more about how data works in 3D models and video games. Um, your normals. We talked about normals and all that metadata. Normals are accessed in the material. Vertex colors are accessed in the material. Textures are accessed in the material. The material is then projected onto the UVs of the model, and then this appears on the surface of the 3D model. When you export your 3D model, you are exporting the UVs, you're exporting the vertex colors, you're exporting the normals, and you're exporting the material slots. You're exporting everything in gray here, but you're not exporting the textures. The textures come separately. You usually make them in a third-party program, or you import them separately. They're just standard images, standard image files, but they correspond with the UV map of that model. Um, anyways, draw calls and materials, right? The optimization thing I was talking about earlier, reusing materials is a very efficient thing to do. You want to reuse materials. So the more draw calls you have, draw calls are like a measure of how many times your graphics card has to um, access memory, I think, something like that. I don't know the exact definition. The point is, draw calls are a very good metric for how complex an environment is to your graphics card. So some modern games have massive amounts of draw calls. Um, Draw calls directly correspond with the amount of materials that are visible to the player at a given instant. So say you're standing in your house, your vase has a material, your desk has a material, your computer has a material, your whiteboard has a material, the walls of your house have a material. Altogether, that's like what, 10, 15 draw calls probably. Maybe your keyboard has a material. The point is, if you can afford to reuse some of these materials, maybe your desk is wooden, and also so is the cabinet that's like sitting behind you. It's the same type of wood. You reuse that material, and it saves you memory. It saves you. It's an efficient thing to do. So reusing materials is really efficient. Now that we understand materials, material IDs, and UVs, uh, what do? We export. And so exporting. I'm going to run you through the process of exporting on my own. So we have this model. It's got textures, but those textures aren't going to come with the export. We're just here back in the standard 3D modeling view. To export this, we go to File, we do Export, and you do FBX files. That's the file type that we send out from Blender. It is the file type that Unity prefers. It's the file type that Unreal Engine prefers. FBX is going to contain the material IDs. It's going to contain vertex normals. It's going to contain, sorry, not vertex colors and normals. I know I didn't talk about vertex colors. They're really a rarely used piece of data. They're usually used to do some crazy magic with some programming where you assign vertex colors procedurally and then use them to like, I don't know, perform wind simulation on parts of the mesh. Like there's all sorts of things you can do with them. They're really not a mainstream kind of thing, and their use case varies. But exporting FBX, it pulls your mesh, all that geometry data of the thing that you have selected. You check the selected objects box. object types, we're only exporting meshes here. We're not exporting armatures. We might export armatures if we're doing animation, but we haven't covered that. We haven't covered animating 3D models. This is just how to make a 3D model perfectly from scratch. That's what this whole series has been about. And you said where to export it to. It doesn't really matter, right? Uh, and I'm going to say X forward. So our X axis is kind of the forward direction. Z axis for up. And I'm going to geometry, tangent space. Tangent space is pretty useful. And normals, I'm going to output faces. So what is this doing? This is preserving the data about what's smooth and what isn't in Blender. Blender defined a sharp edge around here because the curvature was too high. This is going to preserve that. Tangent space is it's important to how the material renders in Unreal Engine or Unity, and if you don't export it, it'll recalculate it upon importing, and that's not always a good thing. I don't quite know the details behind that checkbox. I just know that it's important. But there we go. I did export FBX. We're done here. I'm gonna X out Blender. Not gonna save those changes. I messed up that cup pretty bad. Oops, Steam. And there's our FBX file that we wanted, and that's all. That's all. That's the whole process. And honestly, that's everything I've got for today. Um, you've got your 3D model. You're done. That's it. You can then take that and put it in Unreal Engine. You can take it and put it in Unity. That is the process. To open up the floor to questions. um, no questions.
No questions. Good stuff.
No
Good
questions.
stuff.
Yeah. That's it though. That's it about 3D modeling. Um Moving forward, um I have a lot of content ready to teach about
Mhm.
using Unreal Engine. And that would be starting over from scratch. So there would be no expectation. We would have another first meeting and it's just like, okay, you're here, you know nothing about Blender, no expectations of knowing anything about 3D modeling. We're going to learn the ins and outs of Unreal Engine. We're going to learn materials or something. I have a lot of content related to those. Anything that like anyone's particularly interested in learning more of in the future, any stuff that someone, would you guys like to learn about how to program? Here, I'll give you a teaser. Actually, that's what I'll do. I'll do a little teaser. um this is and by the way, I will upload the hammer successfully UV unwrapped, uh as well as the PowerPoint at the end of the meeting today. But so you can see, I have some pretty cool content on materials. Oh boy. Oh yeah, this is intro to the club. This is intro to materials. Um, yeah, pretty materials are pretty cool. This is me just quickly covering the basics of Unreal Engine, materials and what they do, a little bit about vector math and dot products, I presume. Uh, that's at the most basic level of materials. I think eventually I have a session where we would make an ocean together in Unreal Engine. I think this is easily one of the coolest things that we could do as a workshop meeting. We pretty much build this from start to finish and like manage to learn how it is that it works. And then in Unreal Engine, we just run through the process of doing an ocean, um, giving it reflectivity, giving it waves, and giving it a change in color based on the depth of the water, giving it lots of different sized waves, little waves, big waves. Looks really pretty. Uh, and then doing depth based on the depth of the mesh below it. Uh, some opacity stuff, refraction, and then Gerstner waves, doing those. Gerstner waves are pretty cool. A little bit of parametric equations and basic math. Nothing too hard. Um, but you'll leave understanding all of it, I promise. So yeah, I have cool content pertaining to that. So like thoughts, people, would you like to see that in a future meeting? I know we've had fewer people come to the follow up 3D modeling meetings. A lot of people came to like the first one, but
Yeah, I mean, it'd definitely be cool because I feel like, you know, if someone misses like one meeting, it's hard to come
Yeah,
back and just
this be a fresh start. Exactly.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um. Yeah. Cool waves.
cool
Um.
wave.
um. There's. I think I cover how to make snow textures. Yeah, this is definitely one of the more entertaining PowerPoints I've got. This has Phil Swift in it, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
Really glitchy. Phil Swift. There he is. Offsetting the positions of textures based on this is offsetting the UVs. Um, here's some more Billy Mays here. Um, yeah. So I've got all sorts of cool content to cover that I've made. So whenever yeah, and if anyone has any questions and wants to like come to me directly, learn how to 3D model a very specific object, or you're curious like how do I make a fire hydrant or something. We made fire hydrants in one of the previous meetings. um, the pre-Veterans Day meeting sort of just took a break and did some 3D modeling together. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, materials let you do some really cool stuff. Here's an example of a dynamic material that applies snow to the upwards facing surface of a rock. So you can place it however you want in your level, and it'll always have snow on top. Makes it look nice. Yep.
Yeah. Well, if that's all you've got, Michael, I guess we can.
That's that is all for today. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess we can just wrap up.
been
But yeah.
it's been a pleasure, people. I hope hope you stop by in the future when we do material stuff. If we do that, or if we just delegate to someone else, someone could do some presentations at these meetings. That's more than welcomed. So good luck with finals as well, everybody, as we're nearing that time.
And have a good Thanksgiving break, cause
Oh, that too. Yeah. Happy
yeah.
Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. All right. Well,
All right,
uh,
cool stuff.
yeah. Goodbye. Godspeed.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye.